So before the Portland versus Minnesota game that is going to be starting in 25 minutes from now, I'm going to quickly do a little match week review and look at the first 6 game of this week. And that once again, I'm going to be splitting the review into 2 parts. And that in part 1, which is this video, we'll look at the first 6 game. And then in part 2, I'll look at the last 6 game of this match week. But we start off with the first game of this week. Is a game that I really do not want to talk about because this was not only an absolute heartbreaker, but this could potentially might have just have some long-term cost of us potentially not making the playoffs. So, Atlanta, of course, won 3-1 against the Quakes. But if you did not watch this game, and when you just look at the scoreline, you would think that this was a very comfortable win for Atlanta. That, of course, is not the case. And in fact, there was some really crazy things that happened in this game. And I also think that both teams coming out of this game, even with Atlanta winning this one, I think they're going to be very, very concerned after this victory. And I'll mention why exactly they should be very concerned. But first of all, 4 minutes into this game, Justin Miram scores the first goal of the game to give Atlanta a 1-0 lead. And, throughout this week, I said that, it's going to be an impossible task to get a point out of Atlanta. And that, we need a couple of Hail Marys to do that. And one thing that, if we're going to need that Hail Mary and need a chance to not potentially drop all 3 points in this game, is not concede an early goal. And there you go. We concede an early goal, and yeah, I am just very frustrated about that, and I thought this was going to get out of hand early. But to the credit of the Quakes, they really hang into this game. And by the way, this goal that we conceded early on, it was very unfortunate because of the fact that when Justin Miram struck that one from 25 yards out, it basically hits off of Youngworth and then redirected into the back of the net. And that if Youngworth did not block that shot, and if that did not take a wicked deflection, it would have been an easy save for Daniel Vega. But like I said, to the credit of the Quakes, they did not just completely capitulate, and they fought hard in the game. And in fact, they started to really get into the game, in that, besides the first 5 minutes of this opening 35 minutes or so, the Quakes actually looked like they were the better team. And then in the 27th minute, they got the equalizer when Guzan, of course, scores an own goal. And you know how I said that this goal that we can see in the 4th minute was very unfortunate? Well, this one was an unfortunate goal for Atlanta to concede, because as Espinoza was bombing forward toward the right flank, he basically puts the ball into the box, and then it basically just go through the legs of Guzan. And I think it also hit off of his right thigh, and then it just goes into the back of the net. So, yeah, it's a very unfortunate goal to concede in an Atlanta perspective, but I guess maybe that kind of even things out now that both teams have conceded a goal that was in a very unfortunate circumstances. And, yeah, at that point, we were tied at 1 apiece, and that, we continued to look like the better team and potentially get the second goal, and I thought things were going to look promising for the Quakes. Until we had the red card in the 34th minute, which it was Christian Espinoza getting sent off in this incident, and that there is no doubt that this was a red card. I know there was a lot of Quakes fan that was not happy with this call, but when you look at this, when you look at this call where Espinoza clearly stomp on one of the Atlanta player, yeah, that is all gonna be a red card no matter what. And actually, he got a second yellow for that, even though technically that should have clearly been a red card. And I guess maybe the reason why the referee gave him a yellow is because he was already on a yellow card, and that he basically had a choice of just either giving a second yellow to send him off, or just give him a straight red so that he will also be sent off. But yeah, that of course really changed the game, because now the Quakes were down to 10 men, and as if it was hard enough to try to get something out of it with 11v11, now it just makes it impossible to try to get something out of this game with a man down for the remaining of the game. And I thought, once again, this is just going to get ugly. But to the credit of the Quakes, they really did a good job playing with just 10 men, and that I think this is one of the rare times that the Quakes decided to just kind of pack it in and just kind of put in a low block of a defense and trying to make sure Orlando doesn't have any space to run. And, for Orlando, as much as they have some very good talented player and that they certainly have one of the best attack in the league, they really struggle in terms of breaking down this Quakes low block. And that, guys like Pity Martinez and even Joseph Martinez, who, throughout this game, he was incredibly quiet. I don't think there was even one chance that he had in this entire game where he had a chance to put the ball into the back of the net and extend his goal scoring streak to 16 games. Credit to the Quakes in terms of shutting him down, and also credit to Jackson Yu in terms of that, because he was the player that was marking Joseph Martinez, and that he basically just completely shut him down throughout this game. But as the game went on, things started to get a little bit kind of antsy, and that Atlanta started to kind of feel like they were going to eventually get that next goal. I mean, the Quakes, as the game goes on, they were sitting deeper and deeper into their low block. And that eventually, with 20 minutes to go, I started to see some signs of the Quakes potentially could be capitulating. And that it all started when Almeida, of course, was sent to the stands for the second time this season. Now, I have no idea why he got sent into the stands. I'm not sure. Did he once again ridicule the fourth official like he did against LAFC, that of course caused him to be sent off? But unlike in that situation where Almeida refused to get sent off and refused to leave the stadium, he just kind of quietly walk off and even shakes the hands of the Atlanta staff, which I'm not quite sure did he did that just for honor or the fact that that was just for some time wasting, and hope that it will get the Quakes closer in terms of trying to get a crucial point at Atlanta. And then 8 minutes later, this actually kind of in some way helped out the Quakes, but it's a very terrible thing that we saw in the 79th minute, not just in an Atlanta perspective, but really in an MLS fan perspective, that Joseph Martinez unfortunately went down. And he went down because he apparently collided with Pity Martinez, and that I'm not quite sure did his leg that he of course injured was from the collision or from the impact that he collided with Pity Martinez, or was it the landing that he suffered. Either way, it looked like a very serious injury because he was stretcher off. And at that point, you know how Mercedes-Benz Stadium was rocking because they were really hoping that Atlanta can potentially push on to try to get that crucial second goal. Well, it just gone completely quiet, and probably the quietest I've seen Mercedes-Benz Stadium has gone throughout this season when Atlanta is not losing, because they know that their main goal scored, and really the golden goose of this Atlanta United team, is going to be subbed off, and that he could potentially might suffer a season-ending injury. And, I hope that is not the case, and I haven't heard any reports on whether or not if that injury is serious or not. The only thing that I've heard is that Frank de Boer says that they're going to have to evaluate him and hope that it's not a serious injury. But if this is a serious injury, and that if Joseph Martinez is out for the season, boy, this is going to take a huge hit in terms of Atlanta chances of making the playoffs. So, yeah, it's very unfortunate for him. And by the way, he of course received treatment, and that he of course came back on a couple of minutes later, I was kind of shocked that he decided to do that, because it was clear that he clearly needs to be subbed off. And I understand that he want to keep going because he want to extend his streak of 16 games with at least a goal in a game, but I was really surprised the fact that he decided to just continue. And I'm really surprised why in the world did Frank de Boer decided to not even make the substitution now, because I know Joseph Martinez is a guy that he's all about scoring goals, and if he doesn't score goals, he's going to be very angry about it, and he knows that record that he is so close to getting in, he's going to try to fight anyway in every way possible to do that. But I also kind of feel like, if you're injured and that you could really put a huge jeopardy in terms of your team not making the playoffs because you could further injure your leg and that you could be out for the season, that's why I'm kind of question why did Martinez decided to do that. And I feel like it was a bad decision from him to just keep going. And I know it was hard for him to, like, knowing that if he's going to be subbed off, the streak, of course, end. But at that time, I feel like he probably should have thought about the team instead of just kind of keeps going. So, yeah, with Joseph Martinez getting subbed off, I thought maybe that gives a huge advantage to the Quakes because, Atlanta, this season, for a majority part of the last couple of months, Joseph Martinez has really been the only goal scorer for that team. But it seemed like that kind of sparked Atlanta United, and we've seen this before where whenever one of the most important player on your team or the most important player of your team went down, you immediately respond and try to of course get a winner so that you can of course honor him for of course suffer that serious injury. So that is exactly what Atlanta did as they just piled on a lot of pressure in the last 10 minutes. And Vega, of course, he tried his best to save as many shots as possible, but in the end, the pressure unfortunately got to the Quakes, and that the pressure was just too much for the Quakes to deal with. And it was Hyman that scores his first ever goal from Nagbe to give Atlanta United a 2-1 lead. Then Pity Martinez scored from Vasquez and Villalba to give Atlanta a 3-1 lead. And this goal that we can see in the 92nd minute, this goal, I was very annoyed the fact that the Quakes conceded that, because I know that they were all kind of capitulate when they conceded that goal earlier, and that I knew as soon as if they concede one, they're going to concede probably 2 or 3 more. But if you think about the goal differential right now for the Quakes, which is only at +1, and you know that teams around us in the playoffs are getting around the same amount of goal differential as we have, and that if you just concede like goals late in these games, and that you can see a goal that you could have easily not conceded if you would have just stayed your composure, that is what is so frustrated about that goal. And that I really hope that us just kind of capitulate is not going to really cost us in the end, where if it's going to come down the stretch where the Quakes, whether or not if they make the playoffs or not, that hopefully it's not going to be determined by goal differential. And this game might be an example of the fact that if only we didn't concede that goal late, maybe we would have been in the playoffs. But that, of course, is the final score of this game, as the shots in this game, 18 shots compared to 3 that the Quakes had, 12 shots on goal compared to 2 that the Quakes had. Both teams had 6 shots off target, 1 shot that was blocked compared to none that Atlanta has. And possession-wise, 60% possession compared to 40% possession that the Quakes had. And one more thing that I also forgot to mention and wrote on the board is that Wando also got sent off from the bench late in the game. That's the first time that he ever got sent off from the bench in 300 plus game. And you know that when Wando gets sent off from the bench, you know something clearly have gone wrong with this team. And I understand that a lot of people is going to be talking about the referee in terms of the fact that the referee wasn't very good, and that was one of the main reason why the Quakes wasn't able to get at least a point in that. It was kind of like a 10v2 situation or a 10v12 situation that the Quakes were dealing with. But I think, as much as I know that the referee did had some calls that gone against the Quakes, I think there were some calls that were kind of against Atlanta too, and that there was also some call that was justified too. I mean, the sending off by Espinoza, that's as justified as it gets, with him just kind of stomping on a opponent's leg, and that's always going to be a red card. So I'm not going to blame the ref in terms of the reason why we lost this game, but I think maybe the reason why we lost this game is because Espinoza decided to be an idiot and kind of lost his head a little bit and get himself sent off, and it was just an uphill battle from then on. But I will say this, I will credit the way that the Quakes fought in this game, and that, I know at the end of the day, the headline is going to be it's another frustrating loss for the Quakes because of the Espinoza sending off. And also Almeida did make a couple of very strange substitution that backfired a lot. Of the fact that he decided to take off a couple of his defender and bring on some attackers, even though they were clearly just parking the bus late in the game. But overall, I think the headlines that should not overshadow in this game is that the Quakes fought hard in this game, and that, as I said many times before, when they, of course, are playing on the road, and if they are showing that spirit and showing that kind of fighting effort of never say die, there's really not much I can really complain about the way that the Quakes, of course, losing a road game. And this, of course, is an example of that. Although I really hope that these kind of fighting spirit and this kind of effort will translate in the next couple of games, because, you know, if we can do what we did in this game and show that tenacity of wanted to win the game in these next couple of ones, then I think we could potentially win those game, and that we could potentially get ourselves in terms of getting back into well, we're in the playoff conversation, but maybe even clinch the playoffs before the final day of the season. But as for Orlando, you know, like I said, as much as this is a good win for them, there's definitely going to be a lot of concern with the Joseph Martinez injury, and that I'm pretty sure on Monday, all eyes for Orlando United fans is going to be on the Joseph Martinez injury. Because if this is a long-term injury, and if this is a season-ending injury, then I have a feeling Orlando could be doomed in terms of heading into the playoffs. And that, yeah, I mean, we've seen it before when you have one guy coming into the playoffs and one of your most important player coming into the playoffs missing during that time, then you are basically kind of screwed a little bit. And let's just hope that it's not a serious injury and that it's not going to damage Orlando United's season. But yeah, I spent a lot of time talking about this game because there was a lot of things that I need to dissect in terms of this game. But now moving on into the next match, is Columbus drawing 1-1 against the Whitecaps on the road, and in many ways, Columbus should have clearly won this game. I mean, I have no idea how in the world did the Crew not able to win this game, considering the fact that Vancouver in this game looked like they just don't want to be here, and that they just showed no effort whatsoever until the last second of this game. But in the first half, Zardes, of course, gives Columbus the opening goal with a penalty to give them a 1-0 lead, and that it looked like Columbus was maybe going to get 2 or 3 more goals for the rest of the game, but unfortunately their finishing wasn't very good. And, you know, even heading to the latter part of the game, as much as I know the game is still kind of up into balance, I thought Columbus was 99% sure that they're going to get this victory, mainly because Vancouver, like I said, they just felt like they don't even want to be there, and that, you know, many times when we see teams down 1-0 at home, they tend to kind of push man forward and try to fight and squeak out a 1-1 draw at home. But that's not what Vancouver did in this game, and it just, in many ways, they kind of like just say, okay, well, time is winding down, which is going to give you these 3 points because, you know, our season is over. We don't really care anymore. And yet, somehow, in the 94th minute, Montero scores from Adnan, and Vancouver basically got the equalizer. And yeah, I mean, this is definitely in no way that Vancouver should deserve a point out of this game. And, you know, I'm pretty sure their fans, even with this 1-1 draw, are going to be very upset with the way that their team performed, considering the fact that they just doesn't feel like they even want to be there anymore. And when you look at the shots in this game, Columbus had 18 shots compared to 8 that Vancouver has, 8 shots on goal compared to 3 that the Whitecaps had, 6 shots off target compared to 3 that the Whitecaps had, 4 shots that was blocked compared to 2 that the Whitecaps had, and possession-wise, 54% possession compared to 46% possession that Vancouver has. And that, yeah, you know, when you look at the stats, Columbus clearly dominates every single stat category, and if you watch this game, Columbus clearly dominate throughout this one, and yet somehow, in some way, they weren't able to get all 3 points. And that, you know, at least the good thing for Columbus is that even if they, of course, drop points here, it really doesn't matter to them because they're most likely going to be eliminated very soon in the playoffs. But this is something that I think if Columbus want to be competitive next season, and that they have shown in these past couple of games that they could be competitive in the future. But if they want to be competitive and want to be a team that might get into the playoff position in the Eastern Conference, they cannot afford to drop points so late in the game and just afford to do this kind of thing where you're playing against a team that doesn't even care anymore, and yet somehow you still end up letting them get a goal late in the game and letting them walk out of their home stadium with at least a point. But moving on into the next match is the Fire. So they drew 0-0 to FC Cincinnati. Now, the good news for the Chicago Fire is that New England also drew 0-0 in their game against RSL, so that they didn't really lose any ground to New England. The bad news is they drew against FC Cincinnati, which is a team that I think I'm going to stop saying that this is, whenever you face Cincinnati, it's going to be the free points of the week, considering the fact that Cincinnati, although they are out of the playoffs and that, they already they actually have clinched the wooden spoon with this draw against the Fire, they are still showing some fighting spirit, and that they are really playing that spoiler role, as I kind of feel like maybe they would do when they're facing against all these teams that is fighting for the playoffs. And, in the first half, Chicago had chances to potentially get the first goal, but as it's been the case for majority of the season, the lack of finishing is the reason why they weren't able to get that first goal. And then in the second half, between minute 75 and minute 85, I thought Chicago was really on the ropes, as Cincinnati had a ton of chances to potentially get the first goal, but unfortunately they didn't. And at the end of all that, this game ends in a scoreless draw. And in terms of the shots in this game, 16 shots compared to 10 that Cincinnati has, 3 shots on goal compared to 1 that Chicago has, 6 shots off target compared to 9 that Chicago has, 1 shot that was blocked compared to 6 that Chicago has, and possession-wise, 46% possession compared to 54% possession that the Fires had. And, like I said, this was a big missed opportunity for the Chicago Fire to potentially gain some ground on New England, and that now I really think that, their playoff chances is still not dead, even with this draw against FC Cincinnati on the road, but they better hope that New England would drop points against Portland on the road on Wednesday, because right now it's still a 3-point gap between Chicago and New England, and that, if New England does win their next game, then it would be a 6-point gap, and then at that point, I think it would be pretty impossible for Chicago to potentially catch up to the Revs with just 2 games left to go, and that they have to make up 6 points. Speaking of New England, they, as I mentioned, they also drew 0-0 to RSL, and that, the good news is they, of course, did not lose ground to Chicago in terms of, the actual good news is that all the team behind them actually either draw or lost in this game, so that they kind of gain a little bit ground against teams that is right behind them in the standings. But the bad news is they dropped points at home against an RSL team that wasn't even fielding their strongest starting 11. And that, in many ways, just like this Columbus versus Vancouver game, I feel like New England clearly should have won this one. Like, they had a ton of chances early in this game to get the first goal. I believe Carlos Hill even hits the post 8 minutes in this game. And that was actually not the last time they would hit the post. I think late in the second half, Gustavo Bo also hit the post for New England. And that, yeah, I mean, RSL, they were, for the second half, they were really just holding on so that they can get a point after they basically fill out a pretty weak squad. And that, knowing the fact that I think the reason why RSL decided to do that is that since they, I think, have a midweek game coming up, and that, they want to rest some of their guys for that midweek home game, that's why they decided to kind of put in a bunch of second stringers. So, yeah, I mean, for RSL, it's definitely a good point for them to get on the road, but for New England, it is definitely very frustrated, the fact that, if they can win this game, then I think most likely they're going to clinch their playoff spot, because they will be I believe there will be 4 points or 5 points ahead of Chicago, and that now with a game in hand and you're 5 point above Chicago, all you have to do is get a draw or a win against Portland, and you would basically be clinching your position of going to the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. And also, by the way, I forgot to put the shots and the stats in this game, so I am gonna do that right now. So the shots in this game, just to tell you why New England should have won this one, they had 20 free shots compared to 9 that RSL had. Free shots on goal compared to 3 that RSL had. And possession-wise, 60% possession compared to 40% possession that RSL had. And yeah, I mean, the stats also backs up the fact that New England clearly should have won this one. And the only reason why they didn't win this one was they weren't being very clinical. But yeah, moving on into the next match is Orlando City, who I think after this loss against Houston has pretty much have their playoff hope all but finished. They had to win in this game against Houston, and I know it wasn't going to be an easy game considering the fact that the Dynamo are very good at home, and they're started to find some strive at home that they found earlier in the season. But you would think Orlando City should be able to get a win in this game, and that if they want to make the playoffs this season, this is a game that they have to win. And it looked like they were going to get that win early when they got off to a dream start when Dom Dwyer scores from Pereira to give Orlando City a 1-0 lead. But after that, Houston pretty much just dominate the game, and I'm not quite sure what exactly was Orlando City doing and thinking about just trying to hold on to this 1-0 lead, and that maybe that, of course, would get you all 3 points. And that, Houston, they could have easily tied this game before halftime or even take the lead before halftime because they had a lot of decent chances to potentially put the ball into the back of the net. But eventually they did that in the second half, and they really kind of flipped the script in this game in a quick spell, as in the 70th minute, Albert Feliz scores from Ramirez and Rodriguez to tie the game up at 1 apiece. Then it's Superman himself scoring from Manotas to give Houston a 2-1 lead, and at that point, I think that's when Orlando City realized that, this game is getting away from us, and we better find a way to try to kind of wake up and start going on the attacking end so that we can at least salvage a draw or even get a win in this game. And despite the fact that they tried to do that, they weren't very successful, and at the end of the day, Houston is able to walk away with a 2-1 victory. And in terms of the shots in this game, 15 shots compared to 7 that Orlando City has. 6 shots on goal compared to 3 that Orlando City had. 7 shots off target compared to 2 that Orlando City has. Both teams had 2 shots that was blocked. And for Orlando City, they have 52% possession compared to 48% possession that Houston has. And that, with this loss, Orlando City have now find themselves, I believe, 5 or 6 points behind New England for that final spot of the playoffs. And if New England is able to win that game against the Timbers or even get a draw against the Timbers, I think Orlando City would be officially eliminated from the playoffs. And that would definitely be a very disappointing thing for Orlando City, considering they had the chances down the stretch of potentially making the playoffs. And that, yeah, I mean, with all, you just look at these games down the stretch and the games that you would think that is the most important game in their franchise history, but yet they of course dropped those points, and that they weren't able to get a result in those games is one of the big reasons why Orlando City is not going to be making the playoffs and still are searching for their first ever playoff appearance in their franchise history. But moving on into the next match, speaking of a team that have their playoff hope sealed, that is going to be the case for SKC, which after this 3-2 loss against Colorado, there is no doubt that their playoff hope is all but finished. And this has to be a very agonizing way to have their playoff hope to end it, considering the fact that early on it looked like they were going to win this game and keep their playoff hopes alive. I mean, in the 3rd minute, Gerso gave them a dream start to give them a 1-0 lead, and then Tommy Smith unfortunately scores an own goal that gives SKC a 2-0 lead, and that it looked like SKC was in a good position to try to bounce back after just back-to-back tough losses against LA and Portland in the last two matches. But in the 20th minute, Matt Beasler, of course, got his second yellow for high-booting one of the Rapids player, and of course he was sent off to that match, and that SKC were down to 10 men, and that is when everything fell apart for SKC. Colorado got one back in the 42nd minute when Kamara scores from Jack Price, and I wrote goal of the week, no doubt, because what a bicycle kick this was from Kamara. And the funny thing about this is that Barev, he was kind of standing right in front of Kamara, and that Kamara tried to do like a bicycle kick, and that Barev almost in some way tried to embellish the foul so that bicycle kick, of course, would be taken away, which to me, I'm thinking like, what in the world are you even doing? Like, do you think that a player that attempt to try to do a bicycle kick and try to like embellish a little bit will just take away that goal? I mean, that was just one of the most dumbest thing that I have seen from him, and it was clear that Kamara clearly didn't make any contact whatsoever, and even when he tried to attempt that bicycle kick, he not only got the ball, but he even missed Barev, who was trying to embellish that situation. I mean, that was just a very silly thing for Barev to do. But take nothing away from that bicycle kick from Kamara, who I have no doubt that has to be the goal of the week. Like, anytime when you score a bicycle kick, that it has to be automatically be a goal of the week, because you just don't see it very often that a player can score a goal from a bicycle kick. But then in the second half, that's when the Rapids continued to put on pressure. And really, the Rapids, after that sending off, they were just all over Sporting KC. And Sporting KC was just nursing to try to maybe get out of this game with all 3 points. But that hope was all gone in the 76th minute when Rubio haunts his old team by scoring against Tommy Smith to tie the game up at 2 apiece. Then Smith himself would score on a corner from Jack Price to give Colorado a 3-2 lead. And yeah, that of course is the final score of this game, as Colorado, another road win, and that I think that is now what, the 4th or 5th road win that they have so far this season, which is more than any other season that they have. And I think even more than the previous 3 year combined, with the way that they have been able to get all these road wins this season. And in terms of the shots in this game, Colorado had 19 shots compared to 16 that SKC had, 8 shots on goal compared to 2 that SKC had, 8 shots off target compared to 2 that SKC has, 3 shots that was blocked compared to 6 that SKC had, and possession-wise, 57% possession compared to 43% possession that SKC has. And that stats just look very, very unusual, and just, it doesn't feel real. The fact that Colorado would just dominate every single stat chart, even though they, of course, are down to 10 men and that they are on the road. But yeah, this Rapids team, I'll tell you what, they are playing this spoiler role so good that they still are not eliminated from the playoffs. Like, because they won so many of these games and just spoil so many teams' chances of making the playoffs, it's getting to a point where they are almost getting themselves back into the playoff picture. And that, I don't know exactly if they are going to make the playoffs. I mean, if they do make the playoffs, they will need a lot of crazy things to happen. But you got to give credit to the Rapids and the way that they have fought in this second half of the season. And that, once again, I just have to say that if it wasn't for that 11-game winless run that they have at the start of the season, if they can get some result out of those winning run, they would be right in the thick of this playoff race. And that there is no doubt that if this Rapids team, if they can of course continue to, like, in this off season, they can add a couple of more pieces on on this team. I think this Rapids team can be a very, very dangerous team. And they have proven it for the past couple of months with them playing very, very well and look like one of the best team in the league. But that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys give a like, smash that subscribe button. And yeah, I, of course, will see you guys next time. And I'll see you guys tomorrow for part 2 of the MLS Matchweek review.